Good morning, boys and girls. Happy Monday. We are almost to the end of this unit. We are cruising. We are on lesson 10. Today's lesson is called the Middle Colonies. And you can see here on our primary focus for today that we're going to be asking and answering questions after reading a text about the Middle Colonies. And today's text is going to be in our reader. Let's take a peek at our vocabulary words. Concentrated means focused on something, gave full attention to. Ultimately, in the end, as a result, finally. Diverse, it means various, made up of things that are different from one another. Occupation, that's an activity in which a person is involved, especially as a way to earn money, such as a job. All right, and then we will cruise right over here. Chapter 14, the Middle Colonies. The English had now successfully established a number of colonies in North America. They were determined to claim more land, which is why in 1664 a fleet of English warships sailed into New Amsterdam Harbor, which is now the New York Harbor in New York City. England promptly claimed the harbor as its own. While they were at it, the English claimed the city and all the land around it too. This was particularly bold because not only were these areas already Dutch colonies, but Native Americans were living there as well. How and why did this happen? Let's go back in time to find out. You can see here in this illustration, English warships sailing into New Amsterdam. In 1609, Henry Hudson, an Englishman exploring for the Netherlands, set sail across the Atlantic Ocean on behalf of the Dutch East India Company. His destination was North America. Hudson, like many other explorers of the time, was searching for a northwestern water route to Asia, or what they called the Northwest Passage. Let's see here. This is the map of Henry Hudson's route and Henry Hudson. Although Hudson did not find that route, he did find an area that is now part of the greater New York City area. When he arrived in this harbor, Hudson claimed it for the Netherlands. The harbor area was named New Amsterdam, and the colony was named New Netherlands. Hudson did, however, name the Hudson River after himself, and so a Dutch colony in North America was established. Long before, this Dutch colony began to develop as an important fur trading center. Beaver fur was very popular in Europe, and Henry Hudson had noted that there was an abundance in the area. It is believed by many historians that in 1624, Peter Minuit, the governor of this Dutch colony, purchased the island of Manhattan from a group of local Native Americans known as the Munsee in exchange for trade goods worth 60 guilders at the time. A guilder was a unit of Dutch money, and 60 guilders was very little compared to the value of the land in Manhattan today. Because Native Americans did not share the Europeans' concept of private land ownership, historians are not sure whether the Native Americans understood what the Dutch thought they were purchasing. Let's see here in this illustration, this is the purchase of Manhattan. Nor are historians sure that the Dutch realized that it was the custom of some Native Americans to negotiate for trade goods in return for allowing others to pass through or temporarily inhabit the land upon which the natives were settled. Rather than create boundaries between the Native Americans and the colonists, these exchanges were meant to be the basis for continuing social connections between the groups. So it seems likely that both parties misunderstood the nature of the exchange. As a result, conflicts arose and continued between the colonists and Native Americans in this region just as they had in other regions. As the Dutch colony continued to expand, it began to attract more Europeans. The colony allowed for certain religious freedom, so people who were not very happy with the leaders of their churches began to leave their homes and arrive in the New World. This colony had excellent land for farming and a growing fur trade. The English had set their sights on this area too. For quite some time, they had concentrated or focused on establishing colonies to the north and south of what is now New York, but in 1664, they turned their attention to this area. At this time in England, Charles II was king. His father Charles I had been killed because he was not well liked by the people, and Charles II had been forced to leave England. Later in 1660, Charles II was invited to return and become king. If you remember, King Charles II had acquired or built up a great deal of debt. This, remember, boys and girls, debt is money that is owed. This happened during the 10 years that he had been living in exile. During this time, Charles II had borrowed an enormous amount of money from friends. It's not easy to live like a king when you are not actually recognized as one. When Charles II reclaimed his throne, he looked to North America to solve his debt problems. As you know, he had already given land that did not belong to him in the South to several of his loyal friends. You might ask, why didn't he give away parts of England? Well, because that was against English law. There was no such law in place to protect the land in North America, and Charles believed he was entitled to claim this land. Charles II based this belief on the fact that John Cabot had explored North America for England back in the late 1400s, well before Henry Hudson had done so for the Dutch in the early 1600s. King Charles II put his brother James in charge of coming up with a plan to take New Netherlands from the Dutch. In 1664, James, also known as the Duke of York, sent a number of warships to New Amsterdam harbor. The Dutch had been taken by surprise. Not only was New Amsterdam poorly defended, but the townspeople did not particularly like their overbearing governor at the time, Peter Stuyvesant. You can look here. This is Peter Stuyvesant surrendering to the English. They were unwilling to risk their lives for him against the English, so Peter Stuyvesant had no choice but to surrender. Remember, surrendering is like you're just giving up. And so the Duke of York had carried out his mission without firing a single shot. King Charles II was very pleased indeed. Although the Dutch did try to take their colony back several times, they were ultimately unsuccessful, and by 1669, the area was officially deemed an English colony. In honor of the Duke of York, New Amsterdam became known as New York City, and New Netherlands was now the colony of New York. Not wanting to be too greedy and ever grateful to loyal supporters of the monarchy, the Duke of York gave the southern part of the colony of New York to two of his good friends. These friends were George Carteret and John Berkeley. This area later became known as New Jersey, named after the Isle of Jersey in the English Channel. Soon after, the English took an area known as Delaware away from the Dutch too. So the English had now established colonies in three distinct regions: the southern colonies, which were made up of Maryland, Virginia, North and South Carolina, and Georgia; the New England colonies, made up of Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire; and the Middle Colonies, made up of New York, New Jersey, and the soon-to-be Pennsylvania and Delaware. The population in the Middle Colonies grew rapidly. These colonies attracted not only English people, but people from many other European countries too. In fact, the population in all of the English colonies grew, and within 100 years after King Charles II reclaimed his throne, the population would grow to be 2 million. Two of the most populous cities in North America at this time were located in the Middle Atlantic region: New York City and Philadelphia. These cities grew into bustling commercial centers with large populations. People who moved up to the Middle Colonies from another country brought with them their own individual languages, culture, and range of skills. The people who settled in the Middle Colonies were particularly diverse or varied. You can imagine hundreds of new arrivals speaking different languages, wearing different kinds of clothing, building different types of homes, and eating many different kinds of food. Despite their differences, however, the people who moved to North America all had one thing in common: they wanted a better life. Here's an illustration of newly arriving settlers. There were also many different reasons people chose to come to the Middle Colonies. One was that this region had good harbor areas and long, wide rivers. The English knew that this region would be good for trade. Another reason some people were drawn to the Middle Colonies was that the people in charge of governing those colonies were generally tolerant of people's religions. For the most part, the day-to-day decisions were made by elected officials in town and county assemblies in the Middle Colonies. However, the Duke of York, George Carteret, and John Berkeley were ultimately in charge. Another reason people moved to the Middle Colonies was because it was a good area in which to farm. The climate and soil in the Middle Colonies, compared to the North and South, were perfect for farming. In terms of climate, it was neither too hot nor too cold. There's an illustration of colonists working in fields. Wheat grew well in these conditions. As a result, these Middle Colonies earned the name the breadbasket because they could grow a lot of wheat and supply large amounts of flour to England, as well as to other English colonies, particularly in the West Indies. Many mills were built in this region to grind the wheat into flour. The flour was packaged and exported. Other crops such as rye, potatoes, peas, and flax also thrived. Farming became the main occupation or job. There were other occupations too. There was also a need for sailors, trappers, lumbermen, merchants, and craftsmen. Shipbuilding became an important industry too. There were some enslaved Africans in the Middle Colonies, just as there were in the Southern Colonies. Unlike the Southern Colonies, people in the Middle Colonies used the rapidly growing population as their main source of workers, and they paid them wages. As a result, there was less dependence on slavery than in the South. Builders were needed in the Middle Colonies too. People built houses of different styles, often reflecting the culture of their homeland. Networks of roads, though very basic, were slowly developing. The Great Wagon Road became an important highway, stretching from Pennsylvania south through Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina. Workshops, stores, and coffee shops were opening. Thanks to an English king who needed money, a vibrant new culture was emerging 3,000 miles away. Okay, boys and girls, that is the end of chapter 14. I'm going to have you guys go right into your documents and forms for today's story, and you're just going to be answering a few questions. Have a great day.